We've got our 4 Heisman finalists for this year. It's going to be Max Duggan from TCU. We've got Caleb Williams from USC. We've got Stetson Bennett from Georgia. And lastly, CJ Stroud from Ohio State. Now with me, Joe DeLeon, Alex Sisopoulos, Josh Fisher. We're talking about these 4 finalists. Josh, we want to go to you first. Out of those 4 guys, who deserves to win the Heisman?
Statistically, skill-wise, the best player in the group and the best player in college football is Caleb Williams. A guy I believe that teams should balk at Bryce Young and CJ Stroud for this year in the draft and stick around. I mean, you're the Texans. You might as well wait for Caleb Williams.
We
could say that for another time.
Say that for another time. That's a whole different rabbit hole.
I think he's that good.
Okay.
In football, winning is everything.
Mm-hmm.
And the guys that have won the most, the guy that has won the most is Stetson Bennett. It's a bottom line fact. Do I think Caleb Williams is the best player? Absolutely. Do I think CJ Stroud is the second best player? Without a doubt. Those guys are pros.
Mm-hmm.
Caleb Williams is the best player in college football, period, hands down.
Alex.
Offense, defense. But I think it should be.
But is that your pick?
No, I'm. You know who I'm going with? And this could be a little Big 12 bias. The guy I haven't mentioned yet. I'm going with Duggan. Like, Duggan is a QB sneak away, like we were discussing outside, from winning the Big 12 and going undefeated. A guy that was not the quarterback to start the season, came in off injury, and has led the TCU Horned Frogs to a completely improbable season.
An preseason unranked team.
Led them to the playoffs. Will they get bamboozled by... They probably would have gotten bamboozled by Georgia, but they could compete in the Michigan game.
They're going to get dicked down by Michigan. It doesn't matter what's going to happen in the playoff.
You would know a thing or two about that. Let me say this. Anything could happen in football, and I think Duggan, based off what he meant to his team, should win the Heisman. Caleb Williams is the best player, though.
Alex, do you agree with him?
I believe that Caleb Williams is going to end up going home with the hardware.
For sure.
I'm with you from... It depends on how you want to look at the award. And like, Joe, you were saying before we got in here that if this was the NFL and we were talking about MVP, you look at the Georgia Bulldogs resume, and Stetson Bennett he'd be winning this award.
Who's going to win the MVP? Like, the NFL MVP is Jalen Hurts, for sure, because they are 11-1.
Right. So that's the argument. In I want to say Stetson Bennett. I don't think he's been the best player in the country this year, but in terms of a guy that's been a supporter and the reason why they've won games when he's stepped up and played his best, it's Stetson Bennett. So based off that argument, it makes sense to go with him.
He also hasn't had a dud of a game, which I feel like a lot of times in college football, when we look at Heisman finalists, you look at, did they play the best in the biggest moments, which I think all of these guys have to a certain respect, except for CJ Stroud, because they got absolutely crushed by Michigan in that rivalry game.
Right, that's why I'm out on
him.
I
think
he wasn't brutal.
While Utah did destroy USC, Caleb Williams put up an impressive performance, reminiscent of Patrick Mahomes against the Buccaneers, where I left that game thinking, wow, that offensive line was terrible, but Mahomes did a great job. He did the best that he could. I thought Caleb Williams competed that entire game.
Yeah, he also was outstanding versus Notre Dame, and recency bias. Like, that was one of the best performances of the year.
That was why Caleb was going to win it, and sadly, I think Caleb will win it. They brought up a really important thing on the broadcast during that Pac-12 championship game, is that a lot of the votes were already placed, and because of that, before going into the game, seeing him collapse the way that he did, he was dealing with an injury. That's a separate issue. He didn't play up to the par, and he didn't win his conference championship game, and that to me should be detrimental to his chances of winning the award.
One guy's undefeated.
I did think he was the only bright spot for that entire team, though, that game.
Yeah, I think there's...
I don't know if it was a bright spot because he was hobbling around. He was barely doing anything. He couldn't do anything because he could barely move.
He made that one play where he was clearly hurt and he scrambled right and he threw deep on fourth and long where he really had no business converting. But yeah, you're right. I mean, but the defense for USC is why they lost that game to Utah. He's going to win, but I think it's worth giving tons of credit not only to Stetson Bennett but also to Max Duggan, who had the least high-profile personnel around him as well. I know he had Quentin Johnston, who's an incredible receiver and NFL talent, of course. But the rest of that team, they have no right being in the college football playoff, yet there they are.
Got a Harry Potter hat.
He's a bit of a Hufflepuff. He's a bit of a Hufflepuff.
Absolute Weasley vibes, I was going to say. Yeah. The redhead. Yeah.
These references are going completely
That's ironic because you look like a blonde Harry Potter.
The argument for Duggan, though, I'm a big supporter for, and I heavily lean Duggan, and I know I was just saying that Caleb doesn't deserve because of him not winning the Pac-12 championship game.
Tough sell for you.
But the differences in their performances and the difference in the team performances is pretty stark. The reason why that they came back and they were in a position to almost tie that game in overtime was those final drives by Max Duggan. He stepped up, he nutted up, he did everything that you want from the best player on your team to do, and those were true Heisman moments. I know Caleb had plenty. Caleb had plenty of good plays this season, but for Duggan to do that in a conference championship game, very clearly was gassed, was so nicked up that they were joking about it on the broadcast of how many scars and cuts he had all over him. He didn't care. He stepped up to the occasion. I feel like I don't really get that same stuff from Caleb.
I wish he had gone rogue on 3rd and 4th down and just jumped forward.
If we had beaten
over the center and just and dove into the end zone. I mean, the play calling there. One, I'll say, 3rd down, I thought they got in. And it's so weird. Like, why can't we put a chip in the football at this point to figure out, did it cross the line, did it not? Let's just end the conversation, the arguments back and forth. We don't have to cut to Mike Pereira or Blandino or whoever it is. Like, it's a touchdown or it's not.
Yeah, here's what I want to say. One more guy that wasn't nominated, and this is like not even me being biased.
Oh Christ! Okay, go ahead, say it. Just you had to take get your minute in.
Sark called him out of the Heisman. I'm going to say that. I like Sarkisian a lot.
What do you mean he called him out of the Heisman?
I think play call wise, he called him out of the Heisman.
Oh, I thought you were implying that he prevented him from being a finalist. Well, if
Bijan Robinson ran beautifully, ran for what, 1580 or something like that? Is that what he ran for? Mm-hmm. He could have had 1,600 on the ground, which he pretty much did, and he could have had 600 in the air. He could have done all that, and we would have had at least maybe one more win, and he'd be going to New York.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that.
I want to say that.
The play calling and the decision making is what kept Bijan out of it.
In the same sense that Caleb Williams is the best player in college football, I believe that Bijan Robinson is a top 4 player in college football. And that's what the Heisman finalists are. It's the 4 best players in college football. If they had won one more game, if they had gotten to the Big 12 championship, I believe he would have been there.
I think Bryce Young also, shout out to him, was absolutely... He was great. Bryce Young was awesome.
Plenty of quote-unquote Heisman moments, though, this season.
But he also, at the same time, in the games where like he needed to finish out games, specifically, like I look at the LSU one. Like that one's like he did everything he could in that situation, but to not win those games, it's hard to make the argument for somebody like that.
Especially a guy who won the award last year.
Yeah. Him, Hooker getting hurt.
Technically, it's a 2-loss team for Caleb Williams in a season last year where USC didn't even win 6 games, and to take the team and then go to the Pac-12 championship, lose, not make the playoff, but do what he did. It's more impressive, right? And we expect more from Bryce Young, so obviously the 2-loss Alabama team doesn't cut it.
It's tough when you set that expectation and then to live up to it. You have to exceed what you did in the previous year to win it. Or be considered back to back.
Shout out Hendon Hooker as well. I think it's going to go Williams, Duggan, Bennett, Stroud. That's how I think it finishes.
Yeah, I think we can all agree on that. Stroud is probably the weakest link, but
will Stroud and Bennett receive first place votes?
Oh, absolutely.
I think everyone will. I think
everyone will.
Yeah. Those who don't, there's plenty of Heisman voters that don't watch any of the games or have any idea what they're talking about. There's going to be plenty of people who throw those votes in for CJ by just looking at his stats. And then I think Stetson, there's going to be a lot of old school voters that are going to be thinking like, oh, a great player on his team that's going to win the national championship. He should be the winner. And we made multiple compelling arguments for Bennett, so he's going to get plenty of first place votes.
Winning is everything.
I think Stroud's the only one who doesn't deserve them, but that's...
if CJ Stroud had won the Heisman and done enough to win it and beat out these other guys for the award, would he be getting picked, Joe, ahead of Bryce Young, or at least mocked ahead of Bryce Young in most
NFL in a great fashion, he would have been. If he went undefeated and won the Big Ten.
It has nothing... Being drafted first overall, in my eyes, doesn't have anything to do with your statistics and your production and your awards. It has everything to do with your projection and your potential.
See Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray, but go ahead.
I have legitimate... exactly, those are perfect examples for
They both won the Heisman.
Yeah, but both Baker and Kyler are struggling right now.
But they were picked. I'm just saying they were picked first overall.
And they shouldn't have been.
But projections aren't always great either because Zach Wilson, is sitting there like with a
Flounder.
cloak on. Yeah.
But, well, there were concerns with Zach Wilson that were overlooked that should not have been. But my argument
No,
with
should
CJ
another time,
Stroud
yeah.
is that the decision-making really showed up in spots where he needed to step up and he didn't make those decisions, which is going to remove him, in my eyes, as an evaluator for that first spot in the quarterback position group. I think it should be Bryce Young, and then it's going to be CJ Stroud not too far after.
And don't even say a third person. And I think we could leave it at
Okay.
that.
Let us know your thoughts. Drop a comment if we're right or wrong.
Hook 'em.